Before we start, take a second. Loosen your shoulders. Take a breath. Grab a coffee, tea, or whatever drink makes the next 15 minutes feel intentional. Because today, we're not talking about violence or scandal or anything you'd expect to be illegal. We're talking about bread. Specifically, the time when the United States government decided that bread, humble everyday bread, was being made wrong, too soft, too white, too wasteful, and that it needed to be regulated. This is the story of how baking bread became a matter of national security, why Americans briefly hated the government for touching their loaves, and how something as boring as sliced bread turned into a surprisingly emotional political issue. Let's rewind. It's the early 1940s. The world is at war, and once again, the United States finds itself in a familiar position, an industrial powerhouse trying to supply not just its own population, but also its military and its allies overseas. War doesn't just consume weapons, it consumes food, enormous amounts of it. Bread, in particular, is everywhere. It's cheap, filling, calorie-dense, and easy to ship. Soldiers eat it, civilians rely on it. Entire food systems quietly bend around it. But there's a problem. White bread, the kind most Americans prefer, is inefficient. To make white bread, you strip wheat of its bran and germ, leaving mostly starch. That process wastes nutrients and reduces the total usable food output from each harvest. In peacetime, this inefficiency is tolerable. In wartime, it's unacceptable. So, the government steps in. In 1942, the U.S. introduces what becomes known as the War Bread Program. The goal is simple: get more nutrition out of the same amount of wheat. The solution? Force bakers to use more whole grain flour. Under government regulations, bread must contain a higher percentage of whole wheat. Loaves become darker, denser, less fluffy, less comforting. This bread is not subtle. It tastes different, it looks different, and Americans notice immediately. But the regulations don't stop there. The government also standardizes loaf sizes. Why? Because variety creates waste. Different sizes require different packaging, different baking times, different logistics. Standardization makes production more efficient, shipping easier, and rationing enforceable. So, bread becomes regulated not just by ingredients, but by dimensions. If you're a baker and your loaf is too big, too small, too soft, or too white, you're not just being artisanal, you're breaking the law. And if you're a consumer, you don't get a choice. This isn't a suggestion, it's mandatory. Predictably, people hate it. Americans are used to many things during wartime: rationing, shortages, sacrifices, but bread feels personal. It's daily, it's emotional, it's childhood and routine and comfort baked into one. Complaints pour in. Newspapers mock the loaves. Housewives grumble. Bakers quietly curse regulators who have never kneaded dough in their lives. But the government holds firm. This isn't about taste, it's about efficiency. And then, in 1943, the government makes what might be the most unintentionally offensive food decision in American history. It bans pre-sliced bread. Yes, that sliced bread, the thing we still use as a benchmark for innovation. The reasoning is, once again, logical. Sliced bread requires more packaging: wax paper, cardboard, metal clips, all materials needed for the war effort. Additionally, sliced bread goes stale faster, increasing waste. So, the government decides that slicing bread is a luxury America can't afford. The reaction is immediate and ferocious. One New York Times article quotes a homemaker complaining that the ban makes it harder to prepare lunches. Another famously writes, "I should like to let you know how important sliced bread is to the morale and sanity of the household." This is not hyperbole. Bread apparently is holding the country together. The ban lasts only a few months. By March of 1943, sliced bread is quietly allowed again. Officials admit that the savings were negligible and the public backlash was disproportionate.
but the broader bread regulations remain. For the duration of the war, Americans eat government-approved loaves. Bakers comply, the system works well enough. And when the war ends, the regulations fade. White bread returns, loaves fluff up, choice explodes. The memory of wartime bread slowly turns into trivia. Except for one thing. The experience permanently changes how Americans think about food regulation. Because for the first time, many people directly experienced the government controlling not just access to food, but its form, its taste, its texture. And that leaves a mark. In the decades that follow, food regulation continues, sometimes quietly, sometimes controversially, but rarely as visibly as wartime bread. Nutritional guidelines emerge, fortification becomes standard, shelf lives are extended, ingredients are scrutinized. But the idea of the government telling people how their bread should look and taste becomes politically radioactive. Which is ironic, because from a purely nutritional standpoint, war bread was arguably better. More fiber, more vitamins, less waste. But humans don't eat spreadsheets. They eat habits. They eat nostalgia. They eat what feels normal. And when that's disrupted, even for rational reasons, resistance follows. Today, bread comes in more forms than ever. White, wheat, sourdough, gluten-free, keto, artisanal loaves that cost more than an entire wartime ration. And that variety feels like freedom. Which makes it easy to forget that for a brief moment in history, the government decided that freedom was less important than efficiency, and that bread was the battlefield. So, the next time you make a sandwich, remember there was a time when that loaf had to meet federal specifications, when slicing it was controversial, when the color of bread symbolized sacrifice. If you enjoyed this story, take a moment to like the video. Share it with someone who loves weird history. Leave a comment about the strangest food rule you've ever heard of. Now, relax, take another sip, and I'll see you in the next one.